I'm going to try to speak loud enough so the people in the back, can you hear me okay back there? Good. I'll try to stay at this level, but if I don't, just raise your hand and I'll know I need, and I won't use the scouting technique, so raising your hand needs to go louder. I brought a separate handout as well because last night about 11 o'clock or so I couldn't go to sleep and I was going, what is it that I need to be doing? And this is a kind of I put together an action plan, an immediate action plan that I will cover in the presentation, and I wanted to make sure you had a copy of that. Did everybody get a copy of this handout? Can I use this for just a moment? This handout?
Yeah.
Okay, if you didn't get a copy, you didn't. Great. I'd like you to have that in part because it has my name and telephone number on it and email contact. Thank you. Okay. As I started to say, I have a degree in electrical engineering from the University of Washington. I have a degree in education from the University of Washington. I've worked on graduate degrees in counseling psychology and business management. Of course, all those pieces seem to fit together for me. Because I've never held the same job more than about 2 years. My last, in my career retiring from Battelle, I did management analysis and I did accident investigation for the Department of Energy. So part of those skills that I developed doing that kind of work has helped me kind of analyze systems. So I'm a systems guy is really what I am, and I'm kind of a research guy. About 2 years ago, I watched a documentary on TV, I think it was on the Blaze TV network, and it was all about electromagnetic pulse and the fact that in the U.S. we have not taken action to harden our electric grid. And I'm an electrical engineer, I understand systems, I'm semi-retired. I felt a real need to have to take this on. I couldn't walk away from it because I couldn't say, we can't sit here and not have anything to deal with this. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and this presentation today is based on about 2 years of research on the internet and looking at congressional testimony and finding all kinds of information that are available. And there's quite a bit available out there. Everything I did on the internet, so you have the information out there if you want to do some more on your own, and I recommend you do that. So what we're going to cover today is I'm going to first talk about what is this high altitude electromagnetic pulse? What does it do? How hemp effects can be mitigated? How far back can you actually read these words? Can I just see raise your hands if you can see them all the way to the back? Thank you. Okay. I sometimes use font that's too small, and with this size TV it makes it even worse. But here we go. Here's what happens. On the left-hand side is the highly technical stuff. My wife has said, Dennis, don't spend too much time there because that isn't the message. And so I will say that what happens is this is a nuclear device triggered at about 300 miles in altitude. And as a result of that, high-energy gamma is created. The high-energy gamma interacts with electrons in the high atmosphere, and those electrons being moved around create an electromagnetic pulse. It's like just a radio, and it just puts out this big burst. And what happens when this burst occurs, and everything I'm going to talk about today is going to be kind of just talking about these things. First of all, electronic devices are susceptible to the magnitude of this event because it's 50,000 volts per meter, which is a very high amplitude. My cell phone, my portable phone at home puts out about 10 volts per meter. This is 50,000 volts per meter coming through. That high altitude energy release creates a pulse. The pulse damages electronics, and also part of the phenomena that occurs causes a damage to the electric grid. Partly because as the energy moves through, it couples onto transmission and distribution wires, and partly because it puts in a ground wave that causes the high voltage transformers at the utilities to catch on fire. When this happens, it affects every aspect of our infrastructure. We are entirely reliant on electricity in every aspect and electronics on nearly everything. When that happens, it's going to take a long time to recover. And the estimates for electric grid recovery range from about 2.5 months, which would be the good news part, to 33 months, which is the bad news part. And I'll cover that as we go.
Does that affect cars also?
Yeah, yes, to some degree. And, here's one of the problems. There's not a lot of research out there to talk about it, so what you're seeing mostly, everything I'm talking about is almost entirely theoretical. There's been some testing. And when they ran tests, they borrowed the vehicles from a GSA customer, and as a consequence, they couldn't take it to damage. So once it had any kind of effect, they just kind of stopped doing the testing on those. And they had 1 or 2 minor failures, but most things would operate afterwards. So it really depends on a lot of physics that we don't have control over. There's too many variables to know for sure.
How new were the GSAs?
These were from around 2000 to more current, and the research says if you have something that was built back in the 90s, chances are you don't have all the electronics on it. And I can make an argument why they may be okay, which is most of the electronics that we have in the car, because there's so many noises, electronic noises in the car, most of them are contained in little metal boxes to keep them from seeing noise from somewhere else. So I can't predict whether the cars will be there, but there are predictions that we lose major transportation capabilities because of this event. And by the way, please ask your questions as we go, because I do want to keep this current with what you're doing, what you're thinking, and make sure if you have a question, someone else probably does too. Yes, sir.
The point is, if you don't have electricity, you only have one tank of gas, and you're done anyway in your car.
Correct. That's correct. And I'm going to get around to that stuff. And basically, that we are totally dependent on what we have on hand. Because the transportation system, the finance system, you can't order something, they can't transport it, the manufacturers can't build it because they don't have power, and they can't ship it because that isn't working, and so you can't contact them to even order it. So you basically have to be self-sufficient if this event occurs today. Yes.
So the way they explain this in our Relief Society, they said this all has to do, like, if we're at war, does the enemy, like, when do the...
Okay, I'm going to give you 2 scenarios.
Okay.
One scenario is something called a coronal mass ejection, which is also, we kind of refer to as a solar flare. And there are coronal mass ejections of high enough amplitude to cause major damage to the grid on about every 100-year basis. The last big one occurred in 1859. It took out the entire U.S. teletype system, or even telegraph system. And I have some pictures here of something that happened in 2009 that I'll show you in a few moments. Yes, sir.
But it's not as comprehensive and effective as the other 2 components of the EMP.
Okay, my wife won't let me talk about E1, E2, and E3, and I think that's what you're talking about here. Yes. And our, so my wife won't let me talk about that. All right, I'm an electrical engineer, and you and I may talk later, okay? Our major concern, from our perspective as homeowners and people in the community, the big issue for us is going to be the damage to the electronics. And what this gentleman is pointing out is that's really that's an immediate wave that occurs in nanoseconds. It has a rise time to maximum peak of 2.3 nanoseconds, lasts about 23 nanoseconds, and it's gone. But in that time frame, there was enough energy transfer to destroy the electronic devices that were susceptible to it. And the power grid really doesn't go away for almost 30 seconds. But when it does go away, as soon as the electronics goes away, all the control systems everywhere fail, and what happens then is totally you can't tell what's going to happen because that isn't the way things are built to operate. Your electronics, when you turn off your computer or just unplug it, the computer still sees a loss of power and then does a whole bunch of transactions to protect itself. If you damage the software that's doing all these transactions, it won't shut down properly. The same thing happens with big equipment and like power systems and pumping systems and that sort of equipment.
Yeah, how does that affect nuclear power plants?
The nuclear power plants are susceptible to this event. In the nuclear power plant I worked in the 1980s, you couldn't key a transmitter in certain parts of the plant because it would trip the plant. And so this kind of an event would undoubtedly trip the plant. Not only that, it's going to trip other things, and if the trip mechanism has been disabled by this electromagnetic pulse, then it may not function the way it's supposed to. Okay, we've known about this since 1962, and I'm not going to spend too much time here. This is a picture on the right, is a picture of, we were doing testing in 1962 because we wanted to demonstrate to ourselves the ability to take out missiles, inbound missiles, from the former Soviet Union and China. And we decided that a good way to do that would be to use this thing called electromagnetic pulse. So in 1962, off of an island called Bikini Atoll in the Pacific, 900 miles from Honolulu, they launched this missile with a nuclear tip on it and detonated it at 300 miles up. And this is the night sky 900 miles away. So from San Francisco, if this was detonated in San Francisco, this is what the night sky would look like for us.
So
When they did that, they took out television stations in the 1960s, and they took out communications equipment. Yes, sir?
where? Was this
In
the
Honolulu.
1.4 megaton shot,
Yes, it was.
July
Yes.
9th?
It was called Starfish Prime.
Right, in the globe fish.
Yes, it was all part of them. There was a series of tests that were being done.
Right.
Okay, so what we have to do and why we need to be preparing for this is, if you were to ask me this 10 years ago, I would have said, we don't really have too much concern about this because the Soviet Union, or Russia now, and China and our economies are all tied together. For them to take an action that would take out our economy would also devastate their economy. And that was called mutually assured destruction. So you've probably heard that phrase. And it was part of a plan that was implemented in the 60s to prevent us going to war in a nuclear war. Since that time, nations whose economies are not as dependent on our economy are now moving into having nuclear capabilities and the missile delivery capabilities that can put this kind of make this EMP occur. When this happens, it will be severe, immediate, and far-reaching. You know, we're used to having events that, we had a hurricane season down south that was really, really bad, but it's in one region, and the remaining regions of the country can help bring protection and assistance to help go through that emergency and get people the help that they need. In this scenario, we're all cut off from each other. We're really very dependent on our community to deal with however we can this outcome. Outside assistance would probably not be available. If we do planning, we can minimize the losses that occur. The more planning we do, the fewer losses they will happen. And that was one of the real incentives to me is, I think I say it a little later on, but I'm going to say it now. in this event, the experts predict anywhere from 50 to 90% of the U.S. population would succumb in the first year to starvation, dehydration, and disease as a consequence of this loss of the infrastructure that's necessary, the minimum infrastructure necessary to sustain life. Planning will help us reduce that. I went through some thinking myself, and first of all, I encourage what you are doing in your preparedness, because as a family member, as some at home, and wanting to do the right thing for my family, I'm going to take care of them. And I looked at the prepper concept. You know, you look at the guys, the preppers, they get their guns, they maybe try to find some place that's a stronghold and all that kind of stuff. I looked at that and decided that while it's always good to have that capability, that in the actual event, it won't work. It doesn't work because if I have my guns and my family protected and other people don't, they're going to come take it from me because there are going to be more of them armed than I have. And if I get together with 5, then 10 people are going to come and take it. That isn't the answer. The answer is we have to do everything we can to prevent the destruction of civil society. And that's where the answer is. We have to work together. Okay. There's one other reason why this is important to me. I'd like to introduce you to Mary Celeste. She's now almost 72 hours old, and she was the daughter of my son and daughter-in-law. And I think that's a real good reason for us to be taking these actions, because we need to protect them. There's something else. These are a couple of quotes from, one of the things that happens, the media and others have tried to treat this like you're kind of a wacko if you're worried about something like this. And I'm saying, if you do the analysis, you're kind of a wacko if you're not doing something about this, because millions of people die based on your decision to take no action. And that's what we have to deal with. These are, Trent Franks has been one of the people in the Congress that has been working this issue for a number of years. And he's one of his quotes is that Iranians in their strategic planning mention the use of using an EMP attack 20 times in their strategic planning documents. And down here is a quote from the former CIA chief, James Woolsey, and the person who led who was part of the Congressional Commission on EMP, Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, and they're basically saying EMP threat is the one way where a rogue nation like North Korea can inflict horrible damage on the U.S. And the word they use is existential threat. Existential meaning life. This is the technology. You can create an EMP. The optimum place is 300 miles up, but you don't have to get 300 miles up. The optimum, you don't have to be able to target anything. You just have to get something up in the air high enough to cause this electromagnetic pulse to go over a long period of time. And the Iranians and the North Koreans have been demonstrating this capability to us, and we've seen it in the recent news articles, and one of the things is that the media often gets it wrong. They'll make a statement like, the North Koreans just had an unsuccessful test because their rocket detonated at apogee, or 600 miles downrange. Well, 600 miles downrange was far enough for it to get up to an altitude where they were demonstrating to themselves that they can push a button and detonate that missile. And if they can push a button and detonate a missile, they can push a button and activate a nuclear weapon. So this is the technology that you don't have to be clever. If you listen to the news, I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened in Hawaii this weekend. And if you watch the pundits afterwards, they were all saying, we don't have to really worry about North Korea yet because they don't have a re-entry vehicle. And they don't have the ability to target well. They don't have good systems to make sure that it will be targeted to where they want it to be. ladies and gentlemen, this is the old adage, nuclear power, in nuclear attacks, you don't have to be accurate. They only have to get up high enough near the United States to create this chaos. And they don't have to re-enter because you don't get to re-entry till you're down about 120 miles in altitude. So if you go outside the atmosphere and come back in, you are still not in re-entry at 300 miles up. So I just want to inform you of that because that's the physics. Yes, ma'am.
Have other countries prepared their electrical systems to be able to prevent it if we do it to them?
That's an excellent question. She asked if other countries have taken action to prevent electromagnetic pulse. The answer is yes. In Europe, that's where all the technology is. If you go to buy something today that was electromagnetically protected, you're probably getting it out of Israel or Sweden or some of the more developed European nations where the technology is being built and sold. This is from a Department of Homeland Security document, which I give you the reference at the back of this presentation. And this dark blue area is the 50% power range. This is a single blast 300 miles up over Omaha, Nebraska. And if you notice the circle, it goes out like this. I'm going to give you another view of that. This is what it looks like over the United States. You pick up Canada, you pick up Mexico. There's a line down here that's kind of hard to see, but you're only a couple hundred miles away from Mexico City. And so the entire North American continent pretty much gets taken out. Alaska would be okay, and maybe if you're way up in Newfoundland, you'd be okay too, but pretty much it's the whole main continent. I've shown an inner circle, which is right here. That's if I only could get up 30 miles, I cover this much of America. If I get up 120 miles, I cover this much of America. So I looked at this, and this is not stuff I found anywhere else. This is my analysis. You can take it or leave it, but I looked at it and said, if I were trying to take out the United States and I didn't want to launch a missile in North Korea or Iran and try to shove it into the United States because that would give the United States adequate time to defend against it, what would I do? I would go off the coast. And if I went off the coast, how many do I have to cover the same area as if I could get over the middle of the United States? The answer is 2 at 300 miles up. If I can only get up 30 miles on that same location, I would affect 160 million people. That's half the population of the United States because the populations of the United States reside mostly on the coasts. If I get up to 120 miles, I've got 312 million people affected. If I get up 300 miles, I get the entire continental U.S. 321 million people are now impacted. This picture here is the one I was talking about. This is a transformer that was in Montreal, Canada in July of 2000. And this fire was started because of a coronal mass ejection event. When the solar flare energies hit the United States, it creates a problem of overheating and breaking down the insulating material on the windings of this transformer. And when those windings wear through, you now get short-circuiting, and when you get short-circuiting, they catch on fire. And the event is about 1/3 the amount of energy that we'll get from a EMP attack. So this is less energy than we're going to see by 1/3. Now the question comes up, what about electronics? If I don't have it plugged in, if I don't have it turned on, is that going to be good? And I'm going to say, well, it's better if it's not plugged in. But here's research that was done at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. This is in a report. And these pictures show that what you see in this bright spot over here, there was a capacitor. These happen to be the interface cards on a computer to the LAN, to the local area network. So these are networking cards. And there are capacitors, and these capacitors get overheated because the energy is very high, and it happens quickly, and they can't dissipate that energy. Here, there's two circuits. It's kind of hard to see probably at the back, but there's two capacitors here. One capacitor is here, the other one is totally gone. And this was not plugged in or turned on. It was just sitting on the bench when they ran their test. So, there's something I want to stress for everybody here, because I'm seeing your faces and because I know how you feel. Guys, I'm talking worst case scenario, and that's what you need to design and prepare for. It doesn't mean it would be that bad, because there's a lot of variables here, and the range of the experts, the guys that really know this stuff, they say, well, 10% of the transformers will be destroyed, or 70%. Well, 10% would be pretty darn good, and we could probably get through that. It would probably have serious repercussions, but wow, that's not so bad. We have to prepare for 70. So when I'm talking today, I'm talking about what you do for the worst case scenario, and that's one reason it sounds so bad. Doesn't mean we'll have that. Yes, sir.
Well, but if you look at a map, distribution of the high energy transformers, Washington State has a lot compared to most other states.
That's true, and there's one more fact that goes with that. Because of the latitude of Washington State, the lines of magnetic field in the Earth are closer together, and there's more interactions,
Right.
and so it even creates more problems. So because we're in the northern part of the country, we are more susceptible. And in some of the documents that I have specified in here, you'll see maps that show vulnerabilities and where they are and all that sort of thing. And it does, in fact, show Washington State as having quite a major concern. So we have 50. The worst case scenario here would be 70% of the transformers in the United States are taken out, and it takes 33 months to get them back. That's almost 3 years. For large communication systems, 50% would be taken out, and the range is 10 to 50%. So 10%. Again, there are people out there that are saying it's probably not going to be this bad, so we shouldn't probably take any action. And from a preparedness standpoint, you prepare for the worst and hope for the best is what you do. You don't prepare for the best and hope it doesn't get worse. So this is the, and so as you can see over here, the 33 months for the transformers, 27 months for communications. I've got something here called SCADA systems. Those are the remote control systems that are out there that allow the train system to know where the train is and to switch the switches so the trains get to where they need to go. It's there for transferring natural gas and oil that are being piped through systems. You can monitor temperatures and pressures and do all that, and as a result of having that information, you can cause the pumping to change, and you get feedback systems that make sure that you don't overpressurize. SCADA systems are, you have to have them to operate the sophisticated complex systems that we have today because of the pressures, and we are optimized to use that SCADA to get through. So that's what those are. And then electronics down here, hey, here's the good news. The worst case scenario for your cell phone is 3% will be destroyed. The bad news is that those cell phones have to go to cell towers, and 70% of those are gone. So,
What about airplanes? Gonna fall from the sky?
you know, I haven't read anything on the aircraft specifically. I don't have an authoritative answer for that, is what I'm saying. But I can tell you that aircraft have multiple systems, which gives you some protection. They do have to keep track of electronics to protect interface noise from different things. So there are probably protection around electronic devices. And they use a lot of fiber optic. And the fiber optic cables that are used now, you see them going in. There's the orange pipes that they're putting down in the ground. That's the fiber optic stuff. That fiber optic stuff does not interact with this event. So fiber optics are the way to protect the infrastructure is you get as much fiber optics as you can in there, and that reduces any coupling that could take place. So aircraft, I'll put it, I think in my mind there will be some aircraft that would be affected, particularly their guidance systems and their navigation, their communications gear. And so one thing is, if you're in commercial aircraft, you're very reliant on other information, and you also are reliant on things like you have radar systems and proximity detection systems. If you lose all those, you're suddenly flying blind in the day at 600 miles an hour. That's a tough situation to be in. So it would be a problem. One of the biggest problems we're going to have, I'll get to you, sir. One of the biggest problems we're going to have is that this high energy pulse creates electrical fires. And so there'll be a lot of fires initially as a result of this. Yes, sir.
I also was reading about our naval vessels are subject to EMP faults because they're not properly designed, and the Chinese have kept their aircraft carriers and all that kind of stuff low tech, just for that reason.
I remember back in the 1970s in the Vietnam War, we captured one of the most advanced MiGs that were there, Russian MiGs. And we all laughed because they had tube-type technology until someone pointed out to us that the tube-type technology was resilient to electromagnetic pulse, where the electronics that we're using in ours, solid state, were very susceptible. And so your point is actually well taken. And we've even removed the requirement on a lot of new procurements for electromagnetic pulse protection. I can tell you right now, there's lots going on, like in the Air Force, they're hardening their systems. And I've seen a number of requirements out there. I can also tell you that about 4 months ago, I did a assessment of the Region 10 FEMA office at their request to see whether or not what they would need to do to protect their systems better against electromagnetic pulse. And so there's the behemoth is starting to move in the right direction. The question is whether it gets there in time for us. And most of the things that are going on in the military sense, not in the civilian sense. And that's why I see a need that's not being fulfilled.
Seems like our switch yards would be the most vulnerable.
That's correct. And one of the ways that one of the things they're doing for the switch yards is there's a manufacturer out there called Schneider Electric. They have tested their stuff, their equipment. Their equipment has a withstand voltage of about 4,000 volts. That means it can take a spike of 4,000 volts per meter. And when you put it in a steel box, you reduce the amount of energy it's going to see, because the steel box acts as an attenuator and prevents the signal from getting in. And that would take the signal from 50,000 volts down to about 5,000 volts. And then their equipment has a capability that's better than that, so they get another magnitude of order protection, so they would only see 500 volts, and their equipment is designed for 2,000 volts or 4,000 volts. So those are the kinds of things that go on. And my wife is just, I can hear her in my ear right now. Okay.
Solar power, which I don't have a great understanding of.
Okay. Solar power uses...
What was the question?
She asked about what happens with solar power in this kind of event.
When you're completely off-grid with solar power.
You're totally off-grid.
Not connected to the city.
The solar power equipment uses diodes, and the diodes are electronic devices that would be susceptible to this kind of damage.
Okay.
The inverter power supply, because solar systems are direct current, they then have to use an inverter to make AC, alternating current out of it. And so that converter uses computers and electronic devices, and that goes away. So I'll show you some ideas on that in a minute. So guys, this is the hard part. We lose waste management, refinery, communications, transportation, the finance systems. You can't use your credit cards. The banks can't tell what the transactions are. The businesses can't communicate to the banks. We're basically going back to the 1890s where everything was paper. And that's how the system has to be worked out. Food processing, you know, the farmers out here have GPS-driven tractors, and they have remote sensing water systems that tell them where they need to put the water on their fields. And that there is very high-tech stuff going on because we have the capability, and because it's such a marvelous thing, we're using it, and this would take it away. So we'd lose the ability to farm to some degree, because how do we get the water to the fields? We would lose the ability to process the food because we don't have electricity to operate those plants. And we would lose the ability to distribute the food because transportation would be severely impacted. And when all this happens, government has lost all of its controls because the government doesn't have preparedness on how they're going to maintain continuity of government. And I'll bring this up a little later, but I'll say it now too. There's a bill currently in the Washington State Legislature that is in committee that will be decided. Something will happen to it this year probably, and that bill requires the Washington State government to have a continuity of service plan because they need to continue operating under all catastrophic events, and that I'm hoping will set the tone for us to go back to our local, and they're requiring it of all jurisdictions in the state. That will give us a real impetus to go to our community and say, what are you doing to assure continuity of your services? Okay. All of these infrastructures are interdependent, and so the weakest one is the limiting condition. Do you understand what I'm saying? If I fix everything here, whatever isn't working here is going to impact here and there and there and there. And that's what this is. I love this diagram. It was so useless, but I kind of came up with a purpose for it. Okay. Yes, sir.
There's only one place I know of that's EMP protected.
What's that?
The White House.
Okay. Yes. There'll be. Also, in Colorado, what's the name of the mountain? Cheyenne Mountain. Cheyenne Mountain. Yeah, you need about if you wanted to bury something around here, because of the clay soil and the dryness of the soil, you'd have to go down about 9 feet or more to get protected from an electromagnetic pulse with the soil. Okay. So there's a sequence of events here that I've been sort of talking about, and I want to just refresh it real quickly. An electromagnetic pulse would occur. The civil structure, our critical infrastructure would be lost. When we lose the critical infrastructure, that causes basic needs not to be met. When basic needs aren't being met, people are being injured and killed. And when that happens, there's a breakdown in civil society. Our job in preparedness is to break this chain anywhere we can so that we don't propagate to break down in society. That's the problem that I'm presenting to you, that I want us all to be thinking about. How do we solve this? When this event occurs, we would normally expect FEMA, the National Guard, the State Emergency Operations Center to come to our rescue, but there is no plan at the state level, the federal level, or the county level. Their capability to respond is going to be curtailed because they're going to be impacted, as you've heard some of the questions and comments in the room today. They're going to be impacted. They're going to be just trying to figure it out. And I want to pose one other thing for all of you. Let's say that you're an emergency responder and you have a wife and 3 kids at home, and it's 8 miles down to where you're going to get the vehicle that you're going to use today. Or even if you have the vehicle, do you leave your family without communications and unprotected in their home while you go off to help the community? And the answer is, it's going to be really hard to do that, because we all know where our first place to focus is. This just sort of this slide identifies all the infrastructure pieces. One of the critical ones I want to talk about on this slide is that when this event occurs, we're going to lose, we're going to have knowledgeable people are going to be out there saying, oh my gosh, I know what this event is. I know what's going to happen next. I'm heading to Costco, and I'm going to break into Costco and get as much rice and beans as I can possibly carry and get that in my home. Well, you and a lot of other people are going to have that same thought. And the police department, where are they going to be, and can they protect that? Well, okay, they're going to protect Costco, but Ranch and Home is over here, and they have weapons, and they have equipment, and they have food. So I'm going there, and someone else is heading to Target, and someone else is going to Walmart. So, guys, we can't protect it unless, as a community, we have some sort of plan that says, here's how we're going to deal with that emergency and protect these resources so that they can benefit all of us. There's another key piece here that I want you to think about. Let's say that you have someone in a nursing home in your family. How do we take care of people that are in hospitalized or community centers where there's not going to be food, there's not going to be water, there's not going to be sewer? And what do we do with people that are being held in jail? This plan needs to, this is the part I want you to think about. I've done this in accident investigations all the time, and here's what happens. You start with an event, and you start asking why questions, and it just keeps going like this, and you think, this is never coming back, because it just keeps going bigger and bigger with the problems, and then eventually it comes back down. And what we need to do is, there are lots of pieces here, and if each of us have a piece that we can work on, because that's where our expertise lies, we can bring this to a successful mitigation. Okay, I've already talked about all the stuff we would lose. This is the Lucky Strike Extra. I'm sorry, guys, for using any humor here at all, but it is kind of a heavy topic, and I do want to do that once in a while. Down here at the bottom, you'll see let's see, does it actually work? Yeah, it does. Well, if I can find out where it's looking. Yeah, I don't know where I'm pointing. So now you know why I don't have a weapon at home. There's an influx of refugees. If you're living in Seattle, if you're living in Portland, you've got millions of people in a high-density population area, and there's no provision for getting food. You can't grow it there. You can't do it. You're going to look for a place where you can get away from the crowd. And what looks really good to me is eastern side of the state or the northern part of the state, heading up to Bellingham, or head down south to, get to those farming communities outside the major areas. They're going to be inundated with an influx of refugees if they're not. And you have to be planning for how to deal with that scenario, because if we just think we're going to take care of ourselves, we could very well find that that's being threatened by outside forces coming in. When this discontent finally occurs, and by the way, this timeline is 72 hours. In Katrina, we saw exactly the same kind of process occur. And that was like the wake-up call for emergency response guys, that you got to have plans, you got to have things in place. But we don't have it for this one. But there will be a rise of raiding militias. Well, guys, who in our county has weaponry, has an organizational structure, and doesn't really care about the rest of us?
The gangs.
The gangs. Yeah. So right now, if we want to counteract the gangs, we probably should be thinking about some sort of a response that says, we're going to pull some people together, and we probably have a lot of veterans in the area that could be part of a not an organized militia per se, as much as how would we deal with this, and let's come up with some plans and do some things. So one of the reasons why nothing has happened, and guys, I want you to know, I respect our government. I think people like us are running the government. They just have different jobs, and they're dealing with, in your day-to-day business, and I've experienced this because I went in and talked with the county emergency preparedness person. If I walk into your office and say, what are you going to do about electromagnetic pulse? I go, wait a minute, I've got this pile of stuff I'm already too late on that I need to get doing. My boss is on me about this, and the lawyers tell me I have to do something about this. And now you want me to do that. Well, that's a question of prioritization, guys. And right now, we're not at the priority. This is a picture of a guy was making, he's a professor emeritus at, I can't recall yes, it's George Mason, at James Mason University. His name is George Baker. And he was testifying before Congress, and they said, what's going on to protect this grid? And he said, well, I went to the North American Electrical Reliability Corporation and said, what are you guys doing? And they said, well, look, guys, that's a nuclear attack. We don't deal with that. You need to go to the Department of Defense. So he went to the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense said, wait a minute, we do defense, we do military, that's civilian. You need to go to Homeland Security. So he went to Homeland Security. Homeland Security said, that's electrical generation, that falls under the Department of Energy. And the Department of Energy says, no, we don't do that. The regulatory people for the electrical industry is FERC. Okay? There isn't anyone that wants to step up and take this, and you can see why when you look at the complexity of it. Do you want to be the person who's hoping to get a pay raise that takes on a problem that may not be readily solved over even 5 years or more? But the good news is there are actions taking place. They're just not going to be here in the near term, and we need to take some actions ourselves. This is, the states are waiting for the feds, and the counties are waiting for the state. And that's why nothing's happening. So we have a credible threat. You kind of understand. Are there any, you guys should at this point kind of have a sense of this can be really bad in its worst case. But there are, the big issue is the loss of power. The loss of electronics is serious, but not as bad as the loss of electricity. And the infrastructure that we have wouldn't support the density of populations that we have, even here in our county. So what I found here, government actions are slow in being worked. The Department of Energy is still working on coming up with a plan for how they're going to do their plan. Preparations for falls upon concerned, responsible citizens, and I like this quote. And this quote is kind of what is driving me. So as we said, we're going to try to mitigate this. And I'm going to start with the family, and I'm going to talk about the community and kind of state level stuff that we can do. So now that you understand the problem, and one of the reasons why I want you to have my email and all that sort of stuff is if you come up with a great idea, I'm trying to send this information out to a lot of different people. I would like to have it. That reminds me, I have a sign-up sheet. I promise not to spam you or to turn your email information over to anyone else. But what I would like to do is if you'd like information, and like I can send you an email copy of my slide presentation. It won't be the PowerPoint because the PowerPoint's like 57 megabytes, but it'll be a PDF that you can look at. And if you're also interested in volunteering, I've given you a place to say, click a box. When I talk about volunteering, I'm going to actually give you an opportunity tonight to come up. I have a specific volunteer activity for everyone in this room. Okay, so we're going to cover these things a little bit. So when you heard the emergency alert announcement on Sunday, when you got back from church, you probably went, if you were like me, you kind of went, can you imagine being at home, having this happen, and this is all the information your government has given you. There's an incoming ballistic missile. Take cover. Okay? And there is no other plan. And so when I saw this like, it jolted me and jump-started me again. I need to stay working on this. I can't walk away from it until we have a plan, or there's enough of a plan that we can start doing something to respond. Yes, sir.
But with Hawaii, even if there had been a threat, it was only about a 15 or 20-minute warning.
That's correct. That's the best they could do, and that was from 2,800 miles away. Is what that time frame is, to give you an idea of how fast this occurs. It takes probably 6 or 8 minutes to determine that it's really coming in, and then to get approval to even launch against it. And if I'm off the coast, that isn't enough time to respond. So this is not meant to be comprehensive, guys, but I know you already have these lists because you're part of a preparedness group and you're working on this stuff. But you put together the things that you think you're needing normally, and that is good stuff, but there's some more stuff we can do, and that's what I'm going to cover next. I'm using, on this slide, I'm using your computer as an example, but there are other important electronic devices that you want to protect. And so I'm just going to show you that you have the internet, you have the monitor, the computer, the keyboard. Each of those elements are tied into the wall for power, and then they have signal cables connecting them as well. So what you first do is you go out and you buy a good surge suppressor. And the surge suppressor that you want to buy needs to have 1 nanosecond time. And instead of taking notes on this, here's what it looks like. You can go look at this one on the internet. I've given you the model number on here. It's a P8V. And it's made by a company called APC, which happens to be the same company that makes the electrical controls for the electric industry. So it's a very competent electronics group. I'm not saying you have to go out and buy this one, but if you're not technical, you can look at this one and see what it says about it. How many joules, how many nanoseconds, how many volts will it protect against? And you can use that as your standard to go look at other things. Okay, so you don't, this is a good one, but you can find others that would be pretty good that may not be as expensive. This one's $40. I think I saw it on sale today for $30.
Where?
On the internet. Because I'm out doing this research, Amazon is calling me saying, hey, you know we got a sale. Okay, yes ma'am.
For someone who's not as technical, if an EMP did hit, then like our electrical devices, like our computer,
Right.
it would short circuit it and it would cause a fire. And that's what this is protecting.
This is protecting the okay, there are 2 mechanisms occurring here. One is a transient coming through the power itself. The wires get an energy on them. And this device protects against that. It does not protect against the radio wave that's coming through, just like your cell phone signal. It doesn't protect against that. And that's a significant thing. But this would be the part that does cause the house fire, typically, is the wire-to-wire short out because the insulation isn't sufficient to keep the wire, electricity from jumping across the insulation. Okay. The other piece that you can do, and this information, by the way, is in this Department of Homeland Security document that I'm talking about, and is you buy these little ferrite cores. And the ferrite cores cost about $10, $1 a piece. You buy them in packs of 10 or 12, and you put them on the cores. If you look at your systems now, you probably see these little bulges in your cables. That's ferrite cores. And they're put there because you're trying to reduce the transient noise that comes into your computer so you don't cause things to happen in your computer accidentally. And they have them on the printers. You'll see them on your a lot of interconnecting cables, your HDMI cables, those kinds of things. Almost all of them have that on there because they're trying to protect transients from outside getting into the equipment.
So this doesn't replace the power strip?
No, this would be in addition to. It adds. It's another level. This is quite a bit. These are cheaper, but not. It's a smaller incremental improvement. Then the power strip itself is a very big improvement for protection. And by the way, the power strip has another function too. It protects your equipment against lightning strikes, and if there are real transients out there because of switching problems or on the grid, sometimes they get that, it will protect your equipment from that. So you should have a surge suppressor on your delicate electronics. Yes, sir.
But your power cords would burn off.
Your power cords also, if you're plugged in now, if I'm plugged into my surge suppressor would protect my power cord from that way forward. So I might burn up the surge suppressor as a result of this, but it would protect the piece that I need to have later.
And the power cord up to the suppressor.
Yes, and the power cord up to the suppressor could be damaged. Yes, sir?
Is the installation in an average house sufficient to prevent
No.
something that's just?
No. When I worked at the utility, I worked for Portland General Electric for a number of years. One of my jobs included being manager of health and safety, and I just had this visual picture in my mind of a place where a transformer bridged over, and so instead of having 480 volts coming into the house, they had 2,000 volts coming into the house, and the house lights up like a Christmas tree. It's like, if you remember your favorite science fiction movie where they go through the perturbation and they get the sparks flying from the equipment and all that stuff. That's what it looks like. It's just a sparkler of stuff, and it sets fire to the house. Yes, sir.
Have you run across the whole house surge suppressor?
You can buy commercial suppressors that would do that, and I don't have a price for you on that because as you get larger, they get pretty expensive. On a commercial basis, for something for 3 megawatts, it costs somewhere around $50,000 to protect the three-phase power.
But there are some that you can stick in the panel that are about $200 a piece.
Great.
That seem to have adequate. I'm going to go back and look at my specs now that he gave me some others to look at. But when I checked it, the specs were reasonable, and it just goes in like your circuit breakers on the first part as it comes in. So there's a number of options out there. What's going to work? We don't know.
Yeah.
Nobody tests it.
Your refrigerator and everything else is gonna go too.
That's correct.
So, if you're gonna go for it, why not spend a little bit more money and get your whole house protected?
Well, here's one thing to consider in making that decision is that Bonneville Power is gone for 3 years. So you protected your equipment when power gets restored. And by the way, guys, how many technical people do we have in here? Just show of hands. Okay. I can tell you right now that every technical person worth his salt or her salt in the Tri-Cities would be working on how do we get power restored to where we have to have it first. We wouldn't be sleeping because that's what we would understand, that we have the ability and the capability to do that, and that's where we'd be spending our time because we know that everything depends on that. Yes, sir.
How would transformers that aren't connected to anything, that are sitting in just in a yard as a spare, are they going to be impacted?
They will not. They'll be good. Yes, sir.
Along the same lines, assuming there's a nuclear detonation, that high up, say we had 10 minutes, we'd have some amount of time.
Yeah.
Other than unplugging things in our home, what could we do to protect equipment or even anything electronic?
I would put electronic stuff, if I wasn't otherwise protected it, I would throw it in the refrigerator, I'd throw it in the oven, I'd throw it in the microwave.
Okay.
Because any metal container of any substance will still attenuate some. It's better than not having it inside there.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Not because of your subject here, but I bought about an $800 generator from Costco today. Is that protected? Not using it, but then if I were to fire it up?
It is susceptible to the electronics, can still be damaged if it's not protected from the pulse, and the equipment is susceptible. The Cummins emergency diesel generators that I looked at were not protected. I told you before that there was something about 4,000 volts. The controller for the commercial generators was about 2,000 volts is all it could handle. So it needed more protection than something that could handle 4,000 volts. So it's still susceptible. Yes, sir.
Would a master breaker on a house be sufficient to flick that if you had any warning?
Yeah, I would do that. That's an excellent. Yes, that would be an excellent step to take. If you had time, you'd do it. Good.
So that only, from what we were talking about, that only prevents it through the
the wall.
Right.
That doesn't do anything for the EMP.
Yes, the EMP is still coming
That-
through,
that-
and the
in effect,
EMP
everything
could still damage equipment,
Yeah.
but it's less likely to damage equipment because it's inside the house and everything. You'll get some attenuation through the house. You know that there are places in your house where you don't get good cell reception and that kind of stuff. That's what you look for. Places I don't have cell reception are places where you want to store stuff. Okay? Okay. So the other thing they have you do is unplug stuff in that deal. And so those are the three things that you can do to protect your electronics. Now, I don't consider that to be sufficient, and probably you don't either. And so what I'm going to talk about now is something called a Faraday cage. And those of you that have had physics, this is one of those things they talk about in the physics classes. And what a Faraday cage is, guys, it's a metal box. And you're going to store our equipment that we want to have afterwards in a metal box that's with insulated lining, so nothing comes in contact between the equipment and the outside of the box. And you have the option, if you can ground it easily, I would ground it. But in my situation, I can't ground it, so I'm not grounding it, and that's still good. It's still good.
When you say ground it, what is that like?
Attach it to the same earth ground. You'd like drive a stake into the earth, and then attach to the copper or steel rod, you attach a connector to your device. And you can use, if you've got an older house, you can use probably the metal pipes, the cold water pipes are often, you can use tie to ground through those. If you have a newer house, chances are that's a plastic material and not a conductor, so you're kind of, I can't use that. What I show here is a garbage can that you can buy at any of the local Home Depot Lowe's. And I've kind of put a rim of aluminum foil on it because I wanted to get it a little better electrical connection between the lid and the base of the garbage can, because if it's not exactly perfectly round, there's going to be voids in there. And so I'm kind of filling those voids with just a little bit of foil, and it increases it a little bit. I also have taken some aluminum tape that you can buy. It's the same tape that they use for the ducting. It's like a solid aluminum, and it's a kind of a heavy mill, and it's got an adhesive to it. And I've taken the inside of the garbage can where the seams are, and I've put that tape there just to increase the prevent any leakage on that. And where the handles come through, there are rivets and there are cuts in the metal. You put the tape on the inside, and that'll help a little bit. So there's some things you can do to that. I also have an ammo can that I've had for years. That's a metal can. And if you notice here, I made my wife go out and buy some cookies from Starbucks because this is a cookie tin, and a cookie tin is a real good device because if you notice, the inside is like a bare tin, and they roll the seam on the top, and so when it makes contact, it makes usually pretty good contact. And in fact, that takes a 50,000 volt charge on the outside and keeps it below 5,000 volts. So it is a very good container. This is a Faraday cage. Now, don't think of it as you're buying cookies. You're going out to get Faraday cages.
I like that.
But a modification of the Faraday cages could be just to use very fine mesh wire.
Yes.
In other words, as long as the apertures are less than the wavelength of what you expect.
Right, and in this case, the wavelength is pretty small, so you have to have a lot of in fact, what I'm going to basically say today is these are things you have around the house that you guys can do. And if you want to get more sophisticated, I'll show you what sophisticated stuff looks like in a few moments. But here, I have bubble wrap. I use that as my insulating material, but you could use paper. It just needs to make sure that there's not electrical contact when you put things into your metal storage container, you don't want things touching each other that could conduct. And I have scissors and tape and aluminum tape and the Reynolds wrap foil. And then this is part of a little solar panel unit that I have for just like it gives me just like a minimum light, and I could maybe run a radio for some period of time with a inverter that can connect to a solar panel. And so I'm going to protect that by doing this. And okay, so that's the materials. This just shows, here I've got a blood pressure monitor. I'm putting that, if I've lined this with cardboard, I want to be able to get vital signs, not because I'm a physician, but somebody that knows this would probably be benefited by having it. And I can look at my pulse, and it gives you pulse and it gives you your pressure, but your blood pressure. But I think this is a pretty good emergency piece of equipment. It wasn't that expensive, and it can provide information, and so it might become a community resource at the time this occurs. Yes, sir?
Batteries are no way affected, are they?
Batteries are not affected, but unless it's like a rechargeable battery system that you can kind of leave in the system for a long period of time, generally remove your batteries and keep those separate from the components, because you don't want them corroding is really the problem. Okay, so I put it in the box. This is just, I got this box maybe from the U.S. Postal Service. Yeah, I guess I did. And I wrap it with foil, put the tape around the seams. You make it, just you're wrapping a package, folks. This is really complex stuff. But if you get a chance, at the top, you might roll if you've got pieces coming together, instead of overlapping them like this, you fold them like you would be making, like you're saving your lunches and stuff, where you're wrapping a sandwich. You fold it over 3 or 4 times and fold it down, and then that makes a kind of a folded seam that electronics, the signals do not like to turn corners. And so you're increasing it that way. And then I can put tape across the seam. I just demonstrated I put tape here. I would go the whole length of the seam, but I was just doing this to show you what it would look like. I then wrap it a second time going the other direction. So where my seams were folding this way before, I'm now going to fold it this way. And that way I don't have seams running along each other that are going to be, they might cross, but they'll cross at right angles. And I folded it down, and then I take that. Then you better mark what you have, because especially if you're older like me, you gotta, what am I going to do? What do I do with this? You label it, then you wrap it in bubble wrap, and then you put it in the garbage can, which you see I've got cardboard lining here. I've got some other pieces of equipment here. Here's my list of some of the stuff that I have, most of the stuff that I have. I have little Motorola two-way radios. They have they're supposed to have a distance of maybe 9 miles. That means they're probably good for 3. There's a solar calculator, a flashlight, the dynamo kinds, where you can kind of do this, or you can turn the crank to charge the batteries. 2 broadband receivers, both of those are dynamo as well. And that gives you, I would say broadband, I can listen to multiple frequency ranges. So it has the emergency weather stations, and it has all those different frequencies. A laptop computer. I didn't go out and buy a laptop computer. The one that I don't like anymore because it's too slow, I'm putting that in there because too slow is better than none. And I don't need it. And rather than throw it out, I put it in there because I can use Excel in that, and I can do some things that I might want to have to do. Also, if you have a lot of your stuff, a lot of us have pictures and so forth on electronic media, and they may be stored on hard drives. If you've got hard drives that are full and you're just kind of holding on to them, this would be a place to maybe put them as your storage. And when you want to look for that thing where was that picture of Tom, you can go find it and get it out of storage and then do it and then put it back in. Solar panel and inverter, blood pressure, temperature, O2 meter. And if you have direct telephone wiring, our place we have a charter, and so it's cable modem, And so this wouldn't work for mine, but if you have a regular dial, old dial phone, and you're connected still with copper wire, you could have that. Okay, so those are the things that you can do here. And pretty much, you have to decide what's important, right? And the key point is you can store it this way. And this whole system, the garbage can I think is somewhere around $35. It might be between 20 and 40. The cardboard is not that expensive, I found.
Question, why do
Yes.
you need to wrap them with tinfoil and then put plastic on top?
Okay, when you wrap it with tinfoil, you are creating the Faraday cage. When you
So
wrap
it's
it,
two separate metals.
when you wrap it, yeah, you put wrap it in foil. If you're going to do multiple things, you would wrap it in foil, and then you cover it with another insulating material, and then wrap it with foil a second time. Okay, and one of the websites out there says do it 3 times. I'm saying that's great. If it's not that expensive, get that much more foil. Yes, sir.
Doesn't that make a capacitor?
What it does, it doesn't make a capacitor because of a capacitor is 2 plates. We have 2 spheres. A sphere within a sphere is not a capacitor.
But then that's not material that weighs?
Yeah. Yep. Yes, because you have equal. Okay, guys, I don't want to go into this too much detail, but when a Faraday cage creates an equal potential inside the space. So there is no signal being developed inside the space. The reason why we don't have perfect Faraday cages when we do this stuff is there are imperfections in the way we're putting things together. If we were very careful and could weld our seams, etc., we would be able to do that. But putting a thing within a thing is not a problem because the potential inside is 0 or very small, and then the potential further in is inside. There is no conduction path that you would need for a capacitor as well. Capacitors need a loop. Okay. So here's the kinds of things that happen. If you're in industry, they can make their systems more resilient. Are we okay? Yeah. Okay. All I know is that people oftentimes say, "Come on, Dennis," because I get carried away. So these are the Department of Homeland Security levels. What we just talked about is pretty much level 1 and a little bit of level 2, which is building your Faraday cages. But they have 3 levels, and their levels are based on how soon do you need to have your capability restored. And so in level 1, you're just being driven by dollars. You're looking to save, protect yourself, and you want to do it inexpensively. In level 2, I've got hours in which I can be down. In level 3, I've got minutes. And in level 4, that's basically I need to be continuously in operation. And so level 4 is what we would expect. And they use something, a mill standard. And this was what I used when I went out and looked at the FEMA site to see what their capability was. And there were areas that they needed to improve. Okay, this is the kind of technology that's out there. You can build a room inside your building if you have a space large enough, and in that you can create, coming back to the question in the back, these are power surge suppressors outside the building so that whatever goes inside the building has already been cleaned. So everything inside the building can just be off-the-shelf stuff, and it's protected because we've kept everything noise level out. There are special devices that you can buy. Here's a feed-through device. It's just a hollow piece of tubing. Coming back to what you were talking about a little bit ago, there's something called the waveguide below cutoff, and it means that the signal can't propagate through there. When you drive into the tunnel and you've got your AM radio on, you can only hear it for a short period of time, but your FM is still good. That's because the waveguide is large enough for FM, but too small for AM. I can go out and buy a $10,000 rack, which would probably normally cost me $2,500 or $3,000 maybe. If I paid about $10,000, I have an electromagnetically protected bank, and I can put my networking systems and my computer systems and my communication systems inside that to make sure they're protected from the noise from outside. Or I can do a whole room.
But again, this is only saving our stuff until the power comes back on.
And keep in mind, this is what you would do in a commercial sense. And the reason why I'm telling you these things is that if you're going to get involved in this in the community, you need to know that it is going to cost industry and it will cost others some funds if they want to do these actions. But these actions are not outrageously expensive, depending on what level they need to design to. Yes, sir.
Certainly wouldn't hurt to ground your Faraday cages.
Yes, I would if I could easily, but it's still protective without it.
Can I ask you a question about that room that you have?
Yeah.
So if you have those surge protector things on the outside,
Right.
that helps anything coming in the wires, but the radio wave would still.
And this is all conductive metal, so this is a giant Faraday cage.
Okay.
Is what that is. Okay, and they make special equipment, like you can have ventilation systems. You can put, there's like a clear plastic that you can put on the windows that's good for would take 50,000 volts down to 500 volts per meter coming through the window. And there are special doors. Here's what the commercial surge suppressors look like, going back to your question. And you can see they come in different sizes depending on what you need and so forth. What they have to do is prioritize. You do the easiest stuff with the highest impact first, and then work your way out. I think we'd all do that, but that's just simple project thinking. And we need to, in the on-state thing, we do mission critical capabilities, and then we develop a plan and implement the plan. And we do tabletop drills. And I'm assuming that you guys have probably done drills, those of you in the preparedness group particularly, where you learn from the drill what you need to do better. So mitigating community effects. Okay, here's kind of like 7 things that can be done. Inform and involve the public. That's where I am right now. Apply pressure to local officials. I have an opportunity for you. Form multidisciplinary teams to develop the plans. Those of you, and I don't think you have to have tremendous technical capabilities to start developing plans. You just have to be a clear thinker, because a lot of this stuff is going to have to be what's a common sense way to do that. And technical people look for technical solutions. Non-technical people look for practical solutions. Okay, develop worst case assumptions. Identify those impacts, and if there are existing preparedness plans, we should just look at those plans that we have and say, how would this plan work if we didn't have power? Okay, so our goal now is to get the word out to others, and so I would like to find a way to guilt you into that, but I'm not going to do that. But it's a good idea to talk to your friends and associates and let them know that we need to have a countywide and a statewide plan for dealing with this stuff so that we can participate and take action when we get that cell phone thing that says take cover. And by the way, there's something I hadn't said before I want to say here. If that bomb is detonated 300 miles up, there is no radiation effect on us. It's too far away to be a problem. So on the inbound missile, I'm not going to be sweating whether it's going to land here or not, because it makes no sense to have that missile land. It makes every sense to detonate it in the atmosphere up high.
Yeah, I was in the Presidio Air Defense Artillery, and our mission was, their scenario was if Russia started a war, they would send over their missiles first. 2 hours later, the bombers would come over, and it was our mission to shoot down the bombers. But we had to use nuclear warheads to because those are, if you used a conventional weapon, that weapon would still come down and would explode. It would be dead man.
Yeah.
Armed. So you had to use a nuclear weapon to destroy it. So that's kind of counter to what we're creating our own EMP there.
Yes, that would be what they were doing.
Except
Okay, the next item I have here is we need to ask our council members, city council members, our county commissioners, ask the fire chiefs, the police chiefs, what are you doing to make sure you have continuity in service? Excuse me, gentlemen. Excuse me, gentlemen. We need to contact our legislators, and we need to let people know that this presentation is available. You have my number. If somebody, you know somebody that would like to have a presentation like this, I'll be glad to do that. Okay. HR 2263 is the one I was talking about. It affects our emergency response plan that's part of the Washington State Code, revised Code of Washington State. And incidentally, in the revised Code of Washington State, it is currently illegal to have a nuclear plan that evacuates or relocates people. So it's against the law in the state of Washington to develop a plan that would do something with the people. These are I've given you the contacts for the Benton County, the legislators in Benton County. I'm not sure where you live, but you may have Bill Jenkins and Terry Neely, or you may have Larry Haler and Brad Clifford. And Larry Haler was one of the sponsors on that bill. I think I need to keep going right now.
Can you communicate some of that stuff by email?
Yes, I can. I can give you the entire presentation by email.
Well, and it's on the list of names is on this second.
I've also given you that information in the handout. That's where I am right now. I'd like you to if we brought a third of this room to a city council meeting, and there happens to be one on February 6th, and we came in prepared to do like a 1-minute speech saying, we really need to have a plan, and here's 2 reasons why, and 12 people got up and did that in a period of about 15 minutes, we would have educated the city council on why we need to do something. So what I'm proposing that we would do is you could come ready to do a speech, that if there's somebody in here that could coordinate this group, you could make sure that all the elements get covered and nobody has to try to say the whole thing. The most frustrating part is when you're given 2 minutes, how do you do 20 minutes worth of stuff? Well, you do it 2 minutes at a time. And if you I would propose you do it at about 30 seconds at a time, because it'll have more impact. A lot of people come up and just say very short things, thank people, and get off. So what I've done for you there is this tells you how to structure that. The handout I've given you gives you some examples. Ladies and gentlemen, please don't plagiarize what I've written. I've only put them there to give you an example. You are the best person to communicate your concerns. Your words will carry real energy that's yours. And you only need to have, as an example here, I have 3 bullets of what my message is. There is no federal, state, or county protection to protect critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure is needed to sustain life in densely populated areas. That's why we need this. Thank you for your service to our community. That's my message. Keep it simple, keep it direct. And there's 3 other examples here. I believe that if, as a group, we show up on Tuesday at 7 p.m. at the City Hall, and we sign up. There's a sign-up sheet at most city halls that I've been to. I don't know whether Kennewick does, but I assume it does. And you sign up to be a speaker. They go through their whole business, and at the end, they have to sit and let everybody say something, but they limit you to 1 or 2 minutes. And if 15 people come from home to them, they'll recognize that there's some activism going on here with respect to this. And that's one of my goals, is to get that activism going. This is what came to my mind last night around 11 o'clock. And I thought, this is the right way. This is the way to do it. There are capable people that can develop this plan in the county. They need the priority.
Do you have a date for Richland one?
Same dates, but Richland starts at 6:30. I'm sorry, 7:30. Richland is 7:30. Kennewick is 6:30. And it's on the handout that was passed around. There's not the one with the pictures, but the one that's just the slide presentation.
So you
It's in
gotta
there.
go to your city hall, not
No, you
everybody
can go
goes
to
to
Richland.
Go to the one that you
belong to.
belong to. Yeah, that's how I would do that. And ask some friends. You know, you guys have seen the presentation. I'll send you a copy of it if you ask me for it, and I will. You'll have that available to show your friends, and you can tell. You guys, I think at this point, you guys are probably pretty knowledgeable, and I'm giving you these kinds of references. You can go out and look into this yourself and see what the other folks are saying. This document's about 360 pages long. This one's about 72 pages long. It's much better. And this is the one that had the levels in it and had the picture of the nuclear blast. This is the Department of Energy's. And if you notice the dates on these are January 2017. This was December 2016. So this has been a long time coming, and they're just getting it going. Okay? And again, I'm Dennis Walters. I work for a company part-time. I'm semi-retired. When I do work for Dana Engineering, it's the company I work for, and they have created a website for me, danaengineering.org, where I'm starting to put information. Understanding that this may be videotaped or has been videotaped, I will try to get a copy of that videotape onto this website so you can also share that with others in that way. That completes my presentation.
So I appreciate you coming. This is not easy information, but I really think it's important. Just a reminder, if you're interested in the meals in a bag, those things that were passed out or they're over on this table, we're doing that seminar or that activity on Saturday morning. If you want to sign up. And
Where is that?
So
I just sent it to you. It's on Noble Lane.
it's on Gage Boulevard at the Gage Building by the LDS Temple there. So we're doing it Saturday morning, 8 o'clock. And so the goal is to teach you how to do these packets. Part of my reason for doing that is if we got 3 million people that end up on our doorstep, that's something I can hand them that'll feed 4 to 8 people. And, you know, that's a way that we can teach people how to cook from scratch. Very few people know how to do that anymore. And it's a great project. So if you come, you pay $20, you get 20 packets.
Is it all the same thing?
Oh, yeah, please.
Was it all the same packets or are they different?
Well, we've done a whole bunch of different ones. I think we're just going to do the Scotch broth beans, the beans and grain for packets.
I would like to see a show of hands of people that are thinking right now that they could go to a city hall meeting and raise this issue.
I wonder, do they ask?
No, they won't. They won't. What you're primarily doing, what you're really doing, is you're educating others in the audience and them on the need to do this, and they want to go home at this point, and that's why keeping it short means you'll be heard better.
Kennewick's public comment period is at the beginning of their meeting.
There's at the first. Oh, good.
I believe Richard's not too.
Okay. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.